Have you ever felt completely alone, even while sharing your life with someone? Have you ever looked at the person beside you and had the strange sensation that there's a locked room inside them, and none of the keys you have can open it? For years, I lived like that, between the comfort of a predictable routine and the echo of a suspicion I kept trying to smother. He wasn't the love of my life. He was its end. My husband was the portrait of discipline. He woke up at the same time, drank the same coffee, folded the newspaper with military precision. I called that stability. Today I understand it was a perfect choreography, rehearsed to conceal the emptiness between the steps. The nights away from home started slowly, like raindrops before a storm. Extra shift, he would say. Work problems, nothing big. I smiled, wished him luck, and locked the door, convinced that true love requires patience. The sound of the car engine disappearing down the street signaled that another night was stretching ahead, and I, alone, counted the minutes until morning, repeating that trusting was the same as loving. As time passed, the house began to change its smell. A metallic odor, faint at first, clung to the shirts I washed. I told myself it was rust, maybe machine oil. Until I noticed the dirt under his nails, always fresh, as if he had just finished digging. I asked once, lightly, almost joking. He smiled, that smile that soothed any doubt, and said he'd helped a friend fix his garden. And I, a coward, accepted the answer. But the signs began to accumulate. Boots left by the door, caked with mud even on clear sky days. The way he turned the key in the lock 2-3 times before sleeping. The bedroom window always slightly ajar, even with the cutting cold outside. Everything felt rehearsed, a ritual of someone trying to hide his own trail. I still loved him, or I thought I did. And love, when mixed with fear, is a powerful drug. I convinced myself the problem was me, that I was paranoid, needy, weak. The mind builds mazes to avoid facing the exit. By day, I pretended everything was normal. I set the table, answered messages, smiled at neighbors. At night, I became an investigator, but one without evidence, guided only by premonitions. The sound of the door opening at dawn woke me, and I pretended to sleep. Hearing his footsteps in the hallway was like counting the ticks of a clock that didn't mark time, but distance. His silence was a constant presence. I talked about work, the weather, dinner. He answered in monosyllables, always polite, always neutral. Great, nice, thanks. Words that meant nothing. Sometimes he just smiled and touched my shoulder, as if to say everything was fine. But the touch, cold and calculated, made me shiver. I started to notice small incongruities, silly things that, together, formed a disturbing mosaic. Certain objects disappeared and reappeared in unlikely places. A spare key went missing. The credit card bill showed expenses in places I didn't know. When I asked, he said it was for work. I wanted to believe him. Wanting to believe is easier than accepting collapse. Sometimes I watched his face while he slept. Calm features, almost angelic. No trace of guilt. And that's what frightened me, the serenity. Who carries a secret that heavy and still sleeps like that? I imagined storms inside him, but all I saw was a frozen lake. Love turned into surveillance. I paid attention to the sound of the keys, the time he spent in the shower, the amount of dirty laundry. It became a sick habit, a survival instinct. Fear settled in like a new piece of furniture, impossible to remove. One night, he came home later than usual. The engine stopped and the silence before the door opened lasted too long. When he came in, I noticed a scratch on his arm. I asked what it was. He said, nothing, a box fell, and laughed. I couldn't laugh. The smell coming from him was the same as on his clothes, iron and earth. From then on, my mind split in two. One part remained the devoted wife, preparing dinner and listening attentively. The other watched, analyzed, recorded every detail as if assembling a dossier. I needed proof. Proof of what, I didn't yet know. The following weeks were a slow descent into the abyss. He became more reserved, more introspective. He spent hours in the basement, saying he needed to organize tools. Sometimes I heard him dragging something heavy. When I asked, he said, "I'm fixing shelves." And the sound of metal against metal echoed through the house like a disguised confession. The basement had always been his territory. I avoided going down, claiming I was afraid of spiders, but in truth I was afraid of what I might find. The space had a different smell, not just damp wood, but something denser, more organic. A smell that stuck in the throat. Those nights, sleep abandoned me completely. I walked to the window and saw his car returning around 3 in the morning. He parked carefully, turned off the headlights before entering. He stood in the dark for a few seconds, as if he needed to adjust his face before seeing me. Then he came up, kissed my forehead, and said, "I'm back." I answered, I was worried, and he, "No need." The dialogue always ended there, as if the word "need" were an insult. At breakfast, we pretended normalcy. He flipped through the newspaper. I talked about trivial news. With each page turned, the sound of paper seemed louder. The clock on the wall marked time like a cruel reminder that life goes on even when something inside you has already died. Love started to feel like a memory from another life. Coexistence, a theater. And the stage, our house, filled with small, invisible cracks. I noticed his gaze lingering too long on certain details: a knife on the sink, a key left on the table, my unlocked phone. It wasn't vigilance, it was calculation. One afternoon, while he was at work, I decided to wash his clothes separately. It was an excuse. I wanted to observe. At the bottom of the basket, I found something that made me freeze. A torn piece of fabric, soaked with dried mud, and something that looked like rust. It wasn't rust. I put it in a bag and hid it in the wardrobe. For hours I sat, staring at the floor, repeating, "There has to be another explanation." When he came back, the sound of the door knocked the air out of me. I looked at him and tried to smile. He watched me for a second longer than normal. Then he simply said, "Were you waiting for me?" I said yes. He kissed my forehead and went straight to the shower. The water ran, and I heard the insistent noise, as if he wanted to erase traces only I imagined. In the mirror, I saw my own reflection, pale, exhausted, skeptical. The woman looking back was no longer a wife, she was a witness. Time dragged on. Autumn brought colder, longer nights. He started going out more often, and the excuse changed. Now it was meetings with the boss. When I asked the boss's name, he hesitated for half a second before answering. And that half second was enough to set off all the alarms. I tried to confront him in a disguised way. I asked if everything was okay, if he was happy. He said yes, and added, "You've been different." I replied that I was tired. He smiled. A small, controlled smile, like someone who recognizes the game and accepts the rules. After that conversation, the air between us grew heavier. Every movement seemed observed, every silence measured. I had become a prisoner in my own home, and he, the gentle jailer holding the keys. On one of those nights, it rained hard. He left, claiming he needed to pick something up at the workshop. Rain battered the windows and I counted each thunderclap like counting breaths between crises. When the clock struck 2 in the morning, his car still hadn't returned. I went down to the living room and noticed the basement door was ajar. For a moment, the whole world stopped making sense. The latch hung loose, and the air coming from below was cold, damp, heavy with a familiar scent, iron and earth. My heart beat in my throat. I knew something was calling me down there, and ignoring it would be impossible. And it was there, on that step, that my life began to collapse for good. Going down those stairs felt like crossing an invisible border. Each step seemed wetter, heavier, as if the basement air were made of condensed memories. The flashlight trembled in my hand, and the beam cut the darkness in narrow bands that revealed more than I wanted to see. The sound of my footsteps echoed like the heartbeats of a dead body. The floor was covered with dust and patches of soil. Tools hung from the walls: hose, shovels, hammers, each one carefully cleaned, aligned, but with small residues betraying recent use. On a table, bags of lime were stacked as if waiting for something. I knew that smell wasn't just humidity. It was another kind of odor, dense, metallic, like the air before a storm of blood. With the trembling light, I saw a corner covered by a heavy tarp. I approached slowly, each step echoing in the silence, until I touched the fabric. It was cold, damp, and heavy. I pulled it back. The flashlight revealed stacked boxes, each labeled with letters and numbers, like an inventory. My heart raced. One of the boxes had a loose lid, and inside it, a stained piece of cloth, the same pattern I had found in his laundry days before. Curiosity pushed me forward, fear held me back. An unstable balance, about to collapse. I moved toward the main workbench and saw something that made me swallow hard, a black hardcover notebook, open, full of dated entries. Names. Dates. Cities. Words crossed out and rewritten. A diary of something I still didn't dare to name. My hands were sweating. I picked up the notebook and flipped through the pages. The notes were precise, almost cold, like reports. Each date corresponded to a night outing. Beside some of them, he wrote a single word, finished. I dropped the notebook. The dry thud echoed through the basement and, for an instant, I was sure someone was breathing behind me. The flashlight flickered, and the beam revealed a small door at the back, half hidden behind a cabinet. I didn't remember that door. I approached slowly. The wood was old, the handle cold. I pushed. The creak sounded like a scream in the silence. On the other side was a small room, darker, tighter, with stone walls and an unbearable smell. The light found a table and, on it, a wooden box, polished, almost too beautiful to be there. The moment I touched the lid, my stomach turned. I opened it. Inside were small objects arranged with disturbing precision, a hair ribbon, a gold ring, a coat button, a folded piece of fabric, a silver locket with the initials, EM, crudely engraved. Beside them, photographs of women, young, smiling, some holding flowers, others in ordinary poses, all different. None that I recognized. My hands shook so much the flashlight almost fell. I looked around, the entire basement seemed to spin. The shadows twisted, taking on human shapes for split seconds. It was as if those women were watching me, as if the air held echoes of muffled voices. And then, the most terrifying sound of all, the car engine in the garage. The blood drained from my face. He had returned. Instinctively, I closed the box, slid it back into place, turned off the flashlight, and erased any trace of my presence. I ran up the stairs as fast as I could, trying to control the sound of my breathing. Every step creaked too loudly. Every second felt like an eternity. When I reached the living room, the sound of the door opening matched my last step. I sat on the couch, straightened my posture, and pretended to read a magazine. My heart hammered so loudly I was sure he could hear it. He came in calmly, the same as always. He set his keys on the sideboard, took off his coat, and looked at me for a long second. A long, dilated second. Then he smiled. "Still up?" he asked, in a gentle voice. I nodded. I couldn't sleep. He approached, pressed his lips to my forehead. That touch, which once meant affection, now was a threat. "It was cold out there," he said, walking to the kitchen. "I have to get up early tomorrow. Busy day." The kitchen went quiet. I heard only the faucet and the clink of a glass. He was washing his hands. Washing them for too long. I smelled it. The same smell. Iron and earth. The world seemed divided between the sound of the water and the pounding of my heart. When he came back to the living room, I pretended to read. He sat beside me. The couch sank, and the space between us became a minefield. For a moment, I thought he was going to say something. But he just sat there, staring ahead, his eyes empty. The dark TV reflected our silhouettes, two motionless shadows trapped in a black mirror. I knew what I had seen. He knew what I shouldn't have seen. And between those two certainties, there was an abyss. The following hours were silent torment. He went up to the bedroom, showered, lay down beside me, and fell asleep within minutes. I stayed awake, watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest under the sheet. Each breath was a reminder that the body so close to mine housed horror. When the sun rose, the day looked different, as if the world had aged overnight. I made coffee in silence. He got up, greeted me with a quick kiss, and sat at the table. The clock on the wall marked the time cruelly, each tick echoing in the heavy air. He looked at me for a few seconds. "Rough night?" he asked. "A little," I said. "Must have been the wind." And he smiled. That smile was a disguised weapon. When he left for work, I locked every door. I walked to the mirror and looked at myself for a long time. The reflection was of a woman who still breathed, but no longer lived. The rest of the day was torture. Every noise in the house sounded like a warning. Every shadow, a threat. When the phone rang, I jumped. It was just some random call, but the sound reminded me that I was still there, and that he would be back that night. I spent the entire day trying to decide what to do. Report him? Run? Pretend nothing had happened? Fear kept me paralyzed. I knew that if I made a single wrong move, he would notice. At night, when he arrived, everything repeated like a ritual. The kiss on the forehead, the long shower, dinner in silence. But there was something different in his eyes. Something more calculated, as if measuring my reactions, testing the limits of my calm. During dinner, he broke the silence. "Did you go into the basement yesterday?" he asked, casually. My heart stopped. "No," I replied, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Why?" He shrugged. "Thought I'd left something out of place." He smiled. "My mistake." The smile stayed. The stare, too. After that, I couldn't swallow another bite of dinner. The night was long. When he slept, I cried silently. It wasn't sadness, it was contained despair. In the days that followed, the game continued. He pretended not to know, and I pretended not to realize. But the tension grew. Small changes in his behavior betrayed his vigilance. He spent more time at home, locked the doors, hid the keys. The basement now had a double padlock. Even so, life went on, at least on the surface. We went to the market, to church, visited neighbors. I smiled. He smiled. The world saw an ordinary couple. But inside, everything dissolved. Each exchanged look was a question. Each silence, an answer. I started writing down everything I remembered, every date, every phrase, every detail. It was my way of surviving, of maintaining sanity. If anything happened to me, someone would find those notes. One morning, I found something new on his desk, an envelope with no return address. Inside, there was a single photograph. A woman. Young. Smiling. I had never seen her, but the background showed a tree I recognized, on the trail behind our house. On the back of the photo, a number, 6. My whole body went cold. That night was the longest of my life. Fear ceased to be a sensation and became a presence. I felt it over every inch of skin, in every breath. He noticed. I saw the way he watched me, as if waiting for a specific movement, the mistake that would give everything away. Routine became a cold war. And then, the inevitable happened. On a Friday night, he left in a hurry, saying he'd be back late. I waited half an hour, then an hour, and the courage I thought I didn't have pushed me back toward the basement stairs. This time, I knew what I was doing. I knew I was entering a territory I might not leave. The doorknob was still cold. The door, once again, unlocked. And there it was, the secret, whole, cruel, waiting for me. This time, there was no hesitation. Only the sound of my heart and the wind seeping through the cracks of the house. The basement door opened like a warning whisper. The air below was denser, as if the space itself breathed. The flashlight lit the path in spasms, and each step creaked like a confession. I already knew what awaited me, but I didn't know how much it would break me. The place looked the same and, at the same time, completely different. The notebook, the boxes, the sacks, everything still there, but rearranged. He had been there after me. And now, I wasn't just an intruder. I was a living witness invading a profane altar. My eyes scanned the room. On the floor, near the back wall, there were fresh marks of disturbed soil. The shovel leaned against the wall, still damp, the handle stained. Part of me wanted to run upstairs and pretend nothing existed. But another part, deeper and older, needed to know. I pulled back the tarp again. The wooden box was still there, but something was different. A new object rested inside, a photograph. It was of me. Taken a few days earlier, I recognized the clothes, the setting, even the angle. On the back, a date. And below the date, a number, 7. The floor opened beneath me. Those numbers on the other photos were a count. And I was the next number. My legs shook so hard I had to brace my hand against the wall to stay upright. The cold of the concrete climbed up my arm as if the whole basement were made of ice. I tried to think. I needed to get out. I needed to run. But each step toward the stairs seemed to draw the sound of footsteps from upstairs. I stopped. I listened. The light thud of a door closing. Then, silence. And then, the unmistakable sound of his keys being dropped on the sideboard. He was home. I turned off the flashlight. Darkness wrapped around me like a hand over my mouth. I took a deep breath and stayed still, trying to make my body part of the darkness. I heard his slow steps crossing the hallway. A creak, another. He stopped. For a second, I thought he had sensed my presence. But the sound resumed. He was going upstairs. I seized the moment and ran. I climbed as fast as I could, trying not to let the boards creak. When I reached the top, I closed the door slowly and pressed my forehead against the wood. My heart beat to the rhythm of fear. I went to the couch, picked up the book on the table, and opened it in the middle, as if I had been reading for hours. He appeared seconds later. Wet from the rain, his face lit only by the yellow glow of the lamp. "Still up?" he asked, in the same tone as always. I nodded. He walked past me and went straight to the kitchen. The faucet opened. Again, that ritual of washing his hands, long, methodical, almost ceremonial. Each second was torture. I could smell iron and earth mixing with the steam of the coffee I had left on the stove. He returned and sat beside me. We stayed in silence. The clock on the wall marked each tick like the blow of a hammer. "You're pale," he said, glancing at me. "Did something happen?" I shook my head. "Just a bit of insomnia." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, fingers interlaced. His expression was calm, but his eyes belonged to someone who knew enough. "Have you been messing with my things?" he asked, low, almost a whisper. Air disappeared from my lungs. I forced a smile. "Of course not." He stayed quiet for a few seconds, as if weighing my answer. Then he stood and took a slow step toward the stairs. Halfway up, he stopped and said, "If you ever need anything, tell me. I always know what you need." He went up, and the sound of his steps faded. I remained still, staring at nothing. The turned-off TV reflected my outline, shrunken, small, almost unrecognizable. At 3 in the morning, I decided to act. I grabbed my phone and typed a message to my sister. "Are you awake?" I deleted it before sending. He could read it. He read everything. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor near the window, listening to the wind and trying to imagine a way out. I couldn't just flee. He always kept the gates locked. I had to wait for an opening. A slip. The next day dawned with unbearable weight. He acted as if nothing had happened. He made coffee, called me by the same pet name. But his eyes followed me into every corner of the house. It was a game, and I didn't know the rules. Over coffee, he looked at me for long seconds. "Sleep any better?" he asked. "I tried," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Did you dream about anything?" He took a sip, eyes still on me. "I don't remember." "Good." He smiled. "Sometimes it's better not to remember." His smile hung in the air, and the cup touched the saucer with a dry, precise sound. That morning was the point of no return. I knew I couldn't stay long. Every second in that house was Russian roulette. I spent the day pretending normality. I cleaned, cooked, played low music, and all the while fear followed me like a shadow. In the afternoon, he left for work. As soon as I heard the engine fade away, I went to the basement again. The box was there, open. But something had changed. The photos, all of them were gone. In their place, a single folded sheet of paper. I opened it. "Don't touch what isn't yours." My body went cold. I ran to the bedroom and started packing a suitcase. Clothes, documents, wallet. But in the middle of the panic, I realized, he always kept the gate key in his pocket. I was trapped. Night fell too quickly. The sound of the car in the garage came earlier than expected. I shoved the suitcase under the bed and ran to the bathroom. I looked in the mirror and saw the reflection of a woman in ruins. There was no more love, no doubt, no pity. Only fear. When he came in, he called my name. His voice was calm, but there was something different, slowness, weight. "Where were you?" he asked. "In the shower," I said. "I was thinking of going down to the basement. I need to finish something there. Want to come with me?" My stomach flipped. "I'm tired." He nodded, without insisting. But his eyes stayed. Later, I heard the basement door open. Footsteps going down. The boards creaking. And then, the sound of something being dragged. The sound climbed through the house like a moan from inside the walls. I stood there in the dark, listening. Every minute felt like an eternity. After a while, silence. And the door closing again. He returned, climbed the stairs, and entered the bedroom. He lay down. The mattress sank. The warmth of his body invaded the space between us. "You're shaking," he said softly. "It's okay." His hand touched mine. And in that touch, there was something I had never felt before, possession. I closed my eyes and waited for sleep, but sleep didn't come. Morning light slipped through the curtain slats and painted the wall pale. He was already gone. The silence was too heavy to be real. I got up and went to the kitchen. On the table, a still warm cup of coffee. And beside it, the silver locket. Open. Inside, a photo of me. I felt the floor shift. The mind tried to deny it, but the body already knew. In that instant, I understood I wasn't just a witness to a secret. I was part of it. I ran to the bedroom, pulled out the suitcase, shoved in whatever I could. But before I could finish, I heard the lock turn. He had come back. The suitcase fell from the bed, the zipper snapped. The whole house seemed to hear it. He entered the living room and called out to me. "Is everything okay?" No sound came from my throat. He appeared at the door. Serene look, small smile. But in his eyes, something cold and sharp. "Going somewhere?" he asked. I was just organizing things. He took a step closer. "No need." His voice was almost a whisper. "Everything's in its place here." The silence that followed was the longest of my life. I could hear the ticking clock, the wind against the windows, the blood in my ears. "You trust me, don't you?" he asked, like someone who already knows the answer. I took a while to respond. Yes. I lied. He smiled, satisfied. That's what matters. He took one step forward, then another. He touched my chin with his fingers and made me look at him. You've been different. Just tired. I know. He smiled. Sometimes we even get tired of what we love. He let go of my face and headed for the hallway. Don't forget to lock the door when I leave. I didn't move until I heard the car engine fade away. Then I collapsed. I sat on the floor and cried without sound, because even sound felt dangerous. Outside, the world went on as usual, but inside the house everything was already dead. I spent the rest of the day in the dark, waiting for a chance, a slip, a visit, any opening. I knew I couldn't stay. With every passing hour, the feeling that he knew everything grew. That night, fate did what I didn't have the courage to do. A neighbor rang the bell. A banal sound, almost forgotten. He was on the phone and went down to answer the gate. And in that brief interval, my body acted before thought. I grabbed my bag, documents, a coat. Opened the back door and left. The cold air cut my face. My feet found the path on their own. I didn't look back. Not once. I crossed the street, then the block, then the whole neighborhood, like walking through a waking nightmare. With every step, I expected to hear his car behind me. But the only sounds were the wind and my own breath. I was free. Or so I thought. The street felt longer than ever. Each step was a question, each corner a threat. I walked aimlessly, my body weightless with dread, as if floating above my own fear. House lights still on, windows closed, and in each of them I saw the reflection of what I'd left behind. Dawn smelled of old rain and gasoline. I just wanted distance, from everything, from myself, from him. I walked for blocks until the horizon began to lighten. My hands trembled, my heart beat to a rhythm no longer obeying reason. At some point, I realized I was barefoot. The cold of the asphalt climbed my legs, mixing pain and release. Each breath burned on the way in, but it was street air, not basement air. And that was enough. When I reached the main road, a truck driver slowed down. His face appeared at the window, tired and curious. "You okay, miss?" he asked. I shook my head, unable to form words. "Hop in, I'll take you into town," he said. I got in. I sat beside him and watched the landscape disappear behind the glass. The constant hum of the engine made me cry silently, no sobs, just tears sliding down as if from another body. At the police station, the story came out in disjointed pieces. The officer wrote, looked up, doubted. The words, bodies, box, locket, felt too big to fit on a report form. But he wrote everything down, asked me to wait, called for backup. I trembled. Hours later, they took me to a temporary shelter. A small room, light walls, a narrow bed. I sat and felt my whole body ache at once, as if only then it had permission to exist. I slept for hours. I woke to knocking on the door. An investigator entered. Grave face, firm gaze. "We went to your house," he said. "We found the basement. We found what you described." My heart stopped for an instant. "And him?" I asked. The investigator took a breath. He ran. The car was found abandoned near the woods. "We're still looking." The words fell heavy, but there was no relief. Terror changes shape, it stops being physical and takes up residence in the mind. For days, I lived under the shadow of his absence. The news talked about him, showed photos, mentioned possible victims. I watched in silence, trying to convince myself that man was someone else, a stranger who had never known me. But every detail dragged me back, the voice, the stare, the way he adjusted his wedding band. It was him. It had always been. Over time, the investigation cooled. The police believed he'd gotten lost in the woods, maybe taken his own life. No body was found. The story lost space in the papers, became a footnote. And I was left with the rest. Months passed. I moved to another city, changed my name, abandoned the surname that tied me to him. I started working at a small cafe downtown. I served people, I smiled, I said good morning. On the outside, I was normal. Inside, the clock still marked the moment I found the photo with my incomplete name. Trauma doesn't vanish, it changes address. Sometimes it visits at night, when the wind blows just right and the smell of rain mixes earth and rust. The body remembers before the mind. Hands sweat, heart races. Then I close my eyes and breathe deeply, trying to remember that I'm far away, that the basement door now belongs to another house, another past. With time, I learned to rebuild small rituals. To put on coffee without fearing the silence. To leave the window open without thinking the wind carries voices. To walk slowly through the streets, recognizing sounds, relearning the world. People around me see just a regular woman, but every gesture is a victory over memory. One morning, opening the paper, I read about a skeleton found in a distant grove. The article mentioned a ring, a piece of chain, and a locket with the letters EM engraved. I didn't need to read the rest. I folded the paper, paid for my coffee, and walked out. The cold breeze touched my face and, for the first time, I didn't feel fear. I felt tired, and, soon after, a strange lightness. Some say truth sets you free. I'd say it weighs you down. What frees you is surviving it. Today I live in a small apartment on the 3rd floor of an old building. The walls still smell of fresh paint. I have a plant on the windowsill and a cat that insists on sleeping at the foot of the bed. Sometimes I wake in the middle of the night and watch the city below, the lights, the cars, the people going home. I think about how many of them live beside monsters they don't yet recognize. How many ignore the signs, how many lock the basement out of fear of what they might find. I know the price of that ignorance. And still, I understand. To love is to want to believe. To think danger only exists in other people's stories. I've learned to accept that the past doesn't disappear, it thins out. And when it returns, it no longer has the same power. It visits me in dreams, sometimes as memory, sometimes as warning. I dream I'm in that house again, going down the stairs. But when I reach the bottom, there is no basement. There's an open field, full of light. And in the middle, a woman with her back to me. When she turns, it's me. But smiling. I wake up sweating, but at peace. From time to time, I receive messages from strangers who heard my story. Some say they felt fear, others say they saw themselves in it. Each finds a different mirror. I read them all, but I rarely respond. Because, deep down, there's no comfort big enough to fit. Only the recognition that darkness can live in any home, even the quietest. Today, when I speak of him, I use the past carefully. I say, my husband, and the word comes out small, domesticated, powerless. He became a fragment, a name without a face. What remained is the brutal lesson of looking at people again, but with my eyes wide open. Sometimes I think of going back to that city, visiting the lot where the house once stood. They say everything was demolished, that there's a parking lot there now. I imagine cars passing over ground that once held secrets. Maybe that's how the world heals, covering horror with routine. But I don't go back. Not because I'm afraid. Simply because there's nothing left to see. What mattered I've already taken with me, and what remained, I left buried. I still keep the EM locket in a drawer. Not out of attachment, but out of respect. It's a reminder that evil can disguise itself as love, and that blind trust is the soil where monsters bloom. Sometimes I hold it and feel the cold metal against my skin. It doesn't hurt anymore. It's just metal. When night falls and silence spreads again, I usually light a small candle in the kitchen. It isn't superstition, it's remembrance. The flame flickers, throws shadows on the walls, and I watch, waiting for the instant it steadies. It always steadies. Sometimes the monster doesn't come through the window. Sometimes he hugs you, says he loves you, and comes back covered in mud. That sentence haunts me, but it also guides me. Because it reminds me that danger doesn't always arrive with a crash, sometimes it arrives smiling. Today, I walk slowly. I've learned to hear the house's noises, the wood's creaks, the wind on the windowpane. They no longer sound like threats, they're just life breathing. And when I think about everything I've lived through, I realize surviving isn't forgetting, it's going on even when the memory still burns. I am a survivor. Not a victim, not a heroine. Just someone who learned, in the cruelest way, the difference between love and prison. And if one day you, who are listening to me now, feel that something inside your house, or inside someone, isn't right, listen to that instinct. It never lies. Don't wait for the basement door to open on its own. If this story made you look differently at the person beside you, subscribe and come with me to the next episode. Here, we learn to recognize danger, even when it sleeps next to us.